Observations on how AI is impacting the organization of product teams. In January, I wrote that resistance to AI in product development teams isn't technical, it's cultural, and it starts with leadership. Since then, this topic has been accompanied by a set of interesting questions. How is AI impacting the organization of product teams? Do the three roles, engineering, design, and product management, remain relevant? Do the ratios still hold? 1 designer per product manager and 5 to 9 engineers per product manager. What changes in the way teams work? Short, direct, and honest answer, I don't know. And anyone who claims to know is probably oversimplifying or giving incomplete answers. We're building those answers in real time. And I guess it really depends, but let's see what he says. It's still too early for definitive conclusions, but there are already enough signals to observe some practical effects, not as consolidated trends, but as movements that are beginning to emerge in different contexts. I'm curious to know if it brings up that the expectation from leaders might be affecting this very intensely. If leaders expect that work should be done by a team of, say, 1 product manager and 2 developers instead of a team of 9 or 7. 5 plus 2, 7. Then maybe that is the amount of people that will be working on it. Let's see. It's too early for definitive conclusions, but there are already enough signals to observe some practical effect, not as consolidated trends, but as movements that are beginning to emerge in different contexts. What follows are fields observations, situations I've been repeating with various areas across companies of different sizes and industries. Okay. Which is interesting. I don't know what this article is about anymore because I thought it was about what happens now, but if he's been, what is Joca Torres? Product leadership coach. Okay, so he's around different companies and he's looking at these things more broadly. That is good context. Okay. When execution gets cheaper, the rest needs to reorganize. The most immediate effect of AI on product development has been the increase of execution speed. Writing initial code, generating variations of a solution, creating prototypes, consolidating research and interview data, or testing hypotheses has become faster in many contexts. Prototyping for sure. Testing hypotheses through hypotheses for sure. Production-ready code, I don't know that we've seen that yet. We haven't seen the onslaught of apps, for example. And the studies that I have read so far haven't concluded that you actually are doing things faster. But I mean, the technology is evolving and the way we work with the technology is also evolving. So I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I haven't seen evidence of production-ready code becoming faster to deliver. This doesn't eliminate the work, but it changes the cost of doing certain things. And when the cost of execution changes, the rest of the system tends to reorganize around it. For a long time, implementation capacity was one of the main constraints. There were always more ideas than the team could build. You could argue that the amount of ideas that people have is also increasing. I'm not saying they're good ideas, but AI tends to help people. I'm using help very loosely here, but help people hype up their ideas and present them in a very confident manner. But yeah, that meant teams' organization was designed around this scarcity. Squads structured to deliver backlog with engineering as the primary scarce resource. Yeah, I mean, engineers have been very scarce. And it's interesting to see where we kind of end up in this. In some places, that balance is starting to be challenged, not because engineering is less important, but because individual productivity has increased. What used to take days can now take hours. What once required long cycles of refinement can now be tested much more quickly. This doesn't happen in every team, nor uniformly, but it happens enough to raise an important question. If building has become cheaper, where does the bottleneck move? Okay. Interesting. There's also the sort of effect where people think that they are faster, but they're not really. And again, I don't know. The jury is still out on that. The bottleneck starts to shift. In recent conversations, I've heard something that would have been unlikely not long ago. Engineering teams saying they can implement faster than decisions are being made. This isn't a widespread complaint or universal diagnosis, but it shows up with increasing frequency. When the cost of testing a hypothesis drops, deciding what to test carries more weight. This doesn't mean product becomes the bottleneck or that the solution is simply to hire more PMs, but it does make the role of decision making more visible. Prioritization, defining problems, choosing what not to build, providing a clear direction, things that were always important but that were partially hidden behind the effort of implementation. In one company I spoke with recently, the engineering team started generating multiple variations of the same solution in short time. Meanwhile, the design process was still organized around refining a single version to pixel perfect quality before any testing. The tension that emerged wasn't about who was right, but about adjusting the way of working to a new reality of cost and speed. When testing gets cheaper, the order of things may need to change. Team ratios start to be questioned. For a long time, the classic product team setup involved one product person, one designer, and a large group of engineers. In some contexts, 5 to 9 engineers per product manager. This model was built in a scenario where implementation capacity was the main constraint. If engineering productivity increased, it's natural that some companies start asking whether those ratios still make sense. I haven't seen radical or widespread change. No one is dismantling squads or drastically shrinking engineering teams because of AI, but I am seeing discussions emerge. In one case, the question was whether it still made sense to keep the same squad size when the ability to prototype and test had increased so much. In another, the reflection centered on the role of the product manager in a context where teams can test several alternatives quickly. In yet another, on how design fits when the cost of generating interface variations drops. There is no single answer, but the fact that these questions are being asked already suggests that team organization is starting to be reconsidered. Yeah. And I can see that. It is very easy to generate an interface and to just test it out. What is harder is scaling that down to something that is useful and also usable. That is the hard part. You're still spending a lot of time on that, even if you generate like 15 different designs. None of them are likely going to be minimal enough to be usable. So that's one thing where I think it's hard. AI as a tool for understanding systems. One use that keeps appearing and perhaps gets less attention than it should is AI as a tool for understanding existing systems. In companies with older or complex databases, AI tools are being used to explain sections of code, document implicit business rules, answer questions about system behavior, to help product people validate logic without depending on a single engineer. This doesn't replace deep knowledge or eliminate the need for seniority, but it changes how knowledge circulates. Things that used to be concentrated in few people became more accessible. In one team I spoke with, adopting these rules reduced the time needed to understand parts of the system that no one fully mastered. It didn't solve everything, but it reduced reliance on individual knowledge and improved communication between product and engineering. This kind of use doesn't always show up in broader discussions about AI, but it has meaningful organizational implications. Okay. That is super interesting. I wonder how the context window is affected by this or affects this. Because if the AI kind of forgets what's going on, then it's going to be harder to to use it like this. But if it can keep the entire context of a very complex old system in place for a long time, this is super powerful, and it's going to help a lot of companies with a lot of legacy to do things better. Seniority and supervision. Another recurring pattern is the need for supervision and review. AI tools can significantly accelerate the work of less experienced people, but that doesn't eliminate the need for review by more senior ones. In some cases, it increases it. When generating code becomes easier, evaluating solution quality, defining architecture, and ensuring system coherence carry more weight. Teams that already had strong review and collaboration practices tend to adapt more smoothly. Teams that relied on more isolated contributions may find the transition more complex. Okay, and I mean, this is hard because I don't know any engineers that necessarily want to spend a lot of time reviewing code. A lot of the people that are very senior and very good at what they do, they want to write code. And I wonder how this will affect the well-being of those people, if they are tasked with just making sure that things aren't crazy. The three functions are still necessary. Amid these changes, one thing I haven't seen disappear is the need for all three functions. We still need engineering to turn ideas into reliable systems, design to shape solutions and make them understandable and usable, and product to deliver direction, choose problems and align decisions with the result of the company needs to achieve. AI changes the nature of the work within these functions, but it doesn't eliminate the need for them. Once a client told me that three engineers decided to build an internal system using vibe coding tools. They expected to have something ready in a weekend. 3 months later, the system still wasn't up. The conversation we had was direct. Joca, we have 3 engineers building an internal product, but we are missing what you always talk about, a clear product vision. We didn't know exactly what we were trying to build. The ability to build became faster. The need for direction didn't decrease. Okay, so it's a good argument for why product management is needed. And you still need the act of doing those product management tasks is a pretty deep. You have to go fairly deep in order to do that. So I wonder if AI makes it so that a product manager can take on more products. To what extent is that true? How many products can a product manager take on because of AI? New arrangements are also starting to emerge within teams. In some contexts, people with more generalist profiles appear, capable of turning ideas into working prototypes quickly using AI tools. In others, specific initiatives are created to support AI adoption, whether as experimentation groups or as part of an internal enablement program. These aren't necessarily new formal roles. Often they're adjustments within existing ones. Engineering focus more on architecture and integration, product people with more direct access to data and experimentation, designers exploring multiple variations faster. These arrangements are still experimental, each company is finding what makes sense for its context. What changes when execution accelerates? Perhaps the most useful way to look at this isn't to ask how many people in a team will a team have, but rather what starts to matter more when execution stops being the main constraint. If testing hypotheses become cheaper, choosing the right hypothesis carries more weight. If generating code becomes faster, the quality of architectural decisions carries more weight. If exploring alternatives becomes easier, clarity about the problem carries more weight. None of this is new, but it becomes more visible. In the previous article, I wrote that AI changes the type of work, less execution, more decision-making and strategy. I'm starting to observe this is how the shift in the nature of work begins to reflect on team organization. There is still no clear new model. What we have are adjustments, experiments, and questions being asked. Okay. Let's see. What seems stable and what we are still trying to understand. Below is a synthesis based on my observation of what seems stable and what we're still trying to understand as AI becomes part of everyday work for product teams. Okay, so for the team purpose, product teams still exist to solve customer problems. We still need engineering, design, and product. Cross-functional teams remain necessary. Clear direction and product vision remains essential. Basically, we're just repeating what is already written in the article. What we still don't know is basically when execution becomes easier, what happens. So we're writing this story now. We're still in the transition moment. In some companies, AI adoption is already part of everyday work. In others, it's just beginning. In others, it's still approached with caution. Yeah, and I think caution for me seems pertinent. It's interesting. I'm really interested to see what happens when products are designed very fast. What happens with security? I think that is one of the biggest things. The other thing is what happens when the context window isn't good enough. Yeah. The impact on team organization won't be uniform or immediate, but there are already signs that faster execution is making the role of decision-making, architecture, and problem definition more visible. Perhaps the most useful question right now isn't what the ideal team structure will be, but how we treat the team organization itself as something that also needs to be designed, tested, and adjusted. If we build products through cycles of experimentation, we may need to approach team organization the same way, as product is in evolution. Every role adjustment, every ratio change, every experiment in ways of working helps us better understand how to organize people to fulfill the mission that has always been at the center, solving customer problems through technology in a way that generates results for the business. Okay, I think that is interesting, but it's also kind of up to leadership to set the pace of this. If leadership in companies get very excited or very worried, they might accelerate what ratios of people they have in their companies. I could see arguments, not saying that they're good arguments, for getting rid of all the developers, because the designer and the product manager could just vibe code. On the other hand, you could say that, yeah, we'll just make a very strict scaffolding around based on the strategy of the management team, and then we just skip the PM because the AI can just take over that and essentially vibe code the product strategy. Or you just say, okay, but we are okay with a lower quality interface so long as it's very fast to develop it. So we just use whatever vibe designed thing comes out of Figma Make or Miro. So it is interesting. And I recognize that we're in the middle of a shift, but I think management is going to set the pace for this in many of the places that are sort of tackling this now, in a lot of the companies that are worried. And you are probably going to see more of the things that we've seen with Klarna and other companies, that you get rid of a lot of engineers and then you hire them back, or you get rid of customer service and you hire them back. Designers there's the same thing is going to happen, where you get rid of a bit too many designers and then you need to hire them back. But we'll see what happens.